Did I just stress you out with OBS, Mike?
There's a little bit of stress. I'm not sure if it's all OBS, but long story short, yeah, we failed with the live stream. Sorry, everybody.
That's all right. We'll get it figured out for next time. I wish I knew how many times I've tried to do some form of live stream and it's fallen apart. So this is far from the first time I've had something like this happen.
Just another one of those.
It's just another one of those. It's just the way this stuff works. So if you joined us on Twitch and helped us through some of our troubleshooting, thank you. If not, and you knew nothing about it, we're going to try again next time because I won't let it go. That's kind of how I tend to operate, and I think Mike is maybe going to be frustrated with me in the process, but we'll try it again. So between here and there, I guess this way we at least get to announce that we're trying this on the podcast. And if you're interested in watching us live as we record this, the goal is to have video via Twitch, and we can have the chat and stuff happening there 100% public. We had a conversation with premium members, and without exception, everybody said, absolutely, go for it, make this thing public. So that's what we're trying to do. And I think we simply tried to do too much at once here at the beginning. So we'll make some adjustments. Mike and I will do some more testing. We'll give it another go here in a couple of weeks, and we'll go from there. So as this releases, that would be, what would that be? It'd be a week from when this releases, I think, in theory. We got to check out the schedule and stuff first, but
right.
That's the goal. So now that that's off our chest, take a deep breath, Mike. You ready?
All right. I'm good.
All right. Let's jump into follow-up. I have one. I'll get it out of the way, and then you can do your three. That was to set up daily questions and use those as journal prompts. I did do this, and I can't say that the whole journal prompt side of it turned out the way I expected, because it doesn't actually work as journal prompts. And just for reference, like there are 6 questions that I look at the end of the day. Those are, did I do my best to, and then they all follow after that. Did I do my best to set clear goals today, make progress toward my goals today, find meaning today, be happy today, build positive relationships today, and be fully engaged today? So those are 6 questions I run through at the end of the day. Lots of days here. And sometimes that sparks things that works out for a journal entry at the end of the day, but not always. It's kind of just a sometimes thing. But I am doing it, so I would say that's a success. Thus, daily questions. There you go. I win. Can I say I win?
All right, good job, Joe. You can.
Woo! You
have one follow-up.
I'm batting 1,000 right now for today's follow-up.
All right, so I also had a action item to create my own daily questions, and I did that. I'm going to share something with you via messages that I was going to share before, but then we had video issues.
Sure.
I actually recorded a video about this. I am doing this inside of Roam Research, ding, and I'm using a text expander snippet and a Keyboard Maestro macro. And what it does is it creates a section under my daily notes page in Roam, and it has the questions, and it's got a sliding scale, which you can do real easily in Roam with a double curly brackets slider, I think is the code. So it's just the question and then that piece, and it's all indented. So it's in a block that I can grab and put inside of a separate daily questions page, which collects all this stuff together so I can review it. But I like this. It's a text expander snippet that I throw up there at the beginning of the day. And then as I go through my day, I adjust these because I didn't like the idea of staring at a screen as the last thing that I did during my day. So it forces me to be a little bit more active as I go about my day and I'm answering these things, and not just wait till the end and say, how did I do? Which I really like. The other piece to this, as I mentioned last time, I'm kind of questioning where day one fits. I've been doing the kind of morning pages style journaling inside of my fancy notebook. And I've been doing that kind of as I go throughout the day. That's been going really well too. So I feel like between that and these daily questions, I've kind of found a journaling method that clicks for me.
Sure. And are you, like, okay, what does the review process on that look like? Like, do you go back and review it at all?
I never have yet because I started this just a week or two ago.
Sure.
But I do think that I will do this periodically as part of my personal retreat, that I will go through and I will look at all of the daily questions for the last couple months, just real briefly, maybe 15 minutes to go through all of them and be like, why did I have so many low ones in this particular area? And then figure out what I can do to kind of fix that. That's the thought process at the moment.
Sure.
As with everything Mike does, it's subject to change.
Okay, that's fair.
But so that's the daily questions. And I shared the link to the video specifically. By the time this publishes, I'll put a post up on my website. So there'll be a link in the show notes for people who want to see this in action. It looks more impressive than it sounds.
Needs a visual.
Yep. The other follow-up items I had were to do the Demon Simon exercise. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this, so I feel like I didn't give this the effort that it really should have had. But I did think about it a little bit, and I did actually have some meetings with the person that I thought of for that particular exercise. So the other item here, pretend I'm going to be tested at the end of every meeting. This one has helped a lot. And I don't have like specifically quantifiable proof that like this changed my perspective other than how I feel the meetings went. But this totally changed meetings for me. So this definitely had its intended effect.
Nice. Well, that's encouraging. I haven't used that at all. Maybe that's because I haven't been in any meetings at all since we last recorded.
Not even virtual ones?
Not even virtual ones. None. I've been in 0 meetings since we last talked.
I've had some virtual meetings that have really tested this. Let me tell you. There was one meeting the other day where the organizer and half of the people in the meeting joined the video meeting while they were driving in their cars, which was really exciting.
I bet.
So that's follow-up. I guess actually one other thing I'll mention here, I've shared this with you and I've shared it with a few other people. I have started to make these videos about the sketch notes that I take from the sermons that I listen to. And I shared one last week and got a lot of positive feedback about it. I still am not committing to this every week yet. I think it's still in the experimental phase, but I am recording these short walkthrough videos of like the sermon notes that I take in sketchnote form. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, I'm going to start posting some of those to my website. So I'll put a link in the show notes for people who may be interested in that. I still find it kind of hard to believe that people are interested in my sketch notes. I never thought these would be interesting to anybody but me.
Yeah.
But people are telling me that they like them, so I'll throw it out there.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's interesting to see you talk through your sketch notes. Mike shared this with me. I think it's helpful. I think there are people that will enjoy watching those for sure.
Cool.
So kudos to you, Mike, on that.
Thanks.
So follow-up's done, Mike, which means we need to have a conversation.
Yes, we do. About tech difficulties or
maybe
about books?
Maybe. See, now here's the thing. Like, because we had technical difficulties for like 45, 50 minutes straight, because of that, I think it's interesting that we're now going to step into a talk about a book about the problem with technology and how it causes problems. So it's only fitting that we had problems with it.
How appropriate.
I know. It's like perfectly suited for that. But today's book is Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle. And I think we're going to talk a lot about how texting is a terrible thing to do. That's probably the gist of the book.
I think that's probably fair.
So Sherry's I shouldn't say entire premise, but a lot of the premise is around the concept of how technology has changed the way that we talk to each other and how we have been going down, I wouldn't say it's in her words, but an incorrect method of talking to each other, which we have been doing via little computers, machines, texting, not face-to-face. Anything not face-to-face, I think, is what she would be getting at. I think she would probably be okay with phone conversation. It seemed like she was okay with that to some degree. But even that, I think, falls short of what her intent is overall, for sure.
I agree, although I was thinking about this earlier, and now that you bring it up, it reminded me, did she ever officially define conversation? I don't think she did.
No. Because that was a note I wrote down. I was waiting for the definition, but it's kind of assumed, which I don't know how I feel about, because a lot of times when you pick up a book like this,
380 pages and you couldn't give us a one paragraph description at the very beginning.
Correct. And in a lot of cases, like, you pick something like this up and like it's one of the first things they want to do is define the terms. And she did, what were there were terms that she used. Oh, it was intelligence. That's what it was. She was very particular about how we use the term artificial intelligence at the beginning, and how intelligence means more than just knowledge. Like, she was very particular about that and wanted to reclaim the definition behind intelligence, but yet she never gave us a definition of conversation and how she wanted to, she never said she wanted to reclaim the definition of conversation as well. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. It's fascinating to me that you picked that up as well.
Yeah, and I don't think it's completely necessary. Like you said, it's kind of implied that she's talking about face-to-face conversation in the same place where a big part of the conversation is recognizing people's facial expressions and stuff like that. But it did feel weird that she wasn't talking about that specifically at the beginning. She talked about all of the things that happen when we don't have it, like we become less empathetic, we become less connected, less creative, less fulfilled. And she talked about how we're, page 10, we're so accustomed to being always connected that being alone seems like a problem technology should solve. So she kind of makes a distinction between connection and conversation, but never really defined what she considers to be a conversation. So is this podcast that we're recording right now, is this a conversation? I kind of think she would think no, because there's not the face-to-face aspect of it. But then you get a little bit closer, like, okay, so if the video actually worked, right, is that a conversation?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I think, I'm not sure. I don't have the book in front of me right now, but I don't know when this was written. And I think that as technology evolves, the lines become a little bit grayer. So maybe Zoom wasn't a thing, when she wrote this. She references things that happened in like 2014. So I think it was written probably shortly after that. But so video calling, I'm sure has been around, but I think it's one of those books where you have to take it for when it was written as like, this is a stamp in a period of time. And then you're left with the question of like, well, how has her thinking on this evolved as time goes on?
Right. Yeah, for sure. It was written in 2015. At least that's when it was released.
Okay.
And that it's a good thing to keep in mind that it was released in 2015, because she covers a lot of the territory around groups that are texting each other, and she paints this picture over and over and over again of groups of people who are talking, quote unquote talking, did the thing, and yet they're not actually having a face-to-face. Like, they are texting each other while they're at dinner, or they're texting friends who aren't there, or they're looking for a better party when they're at a given party, and so they don't actually enjoy the one they're at. There's a lot of that sentiment, and it's not till much, much later in the book does she even reference how there's kind of a resurgence against that. Because I've noticed that in some of the youth today, how they enjoy the phone-free retreats. And and such. Like there seems to be people who recognize that that's not the way we should be doing things. So I don't know. I think we may have stepped beyond a lot of her premise on this, but I'm not certain that we're far enough away from it to say it's a non-issue either.
We're also in the middle of a pandemic, so even if we wanted to have face-to-face conversation, that doesn't look the same for most of the places that we would have it.
Yep.
And so there's a little bit of a grain of salt approach that you have to take when reading it right now, because even if you wholeheartedly believe everything that she says and this is the ideal, how are you going to implement that right now? Like there's a whole section here devoted to education. Who knows what schools are going to look like in the fall, but it's probably not going to be what we were familiar with. It's probably going to be a little bit different. And that is going to be working against us having conversation in the way that she did not define, where it's face-to-face, no technology.
Right.
But so you have to figure out, how can we adapt this? What's the second best version of that, And I kind of wish she would have gotten into that, but she really didn't.
Yeah. And at 380 pages.
That is true. That is true.
You had room. So let's dive in here. In the outline, I just kind of laid out the parts. There are 6 parts, about 2 to 3 chapters per part. And let's just kind of work through these. The first of those parts is the case for conversation, in which she does not define conversation, but she argues for its virtues. And the first of those is under the title of the Empathy Diaries. And this is something I think she hangs her hat on for a large part of the book. And so it's fitting, I think, that she starts with that in showing how empathic qualities in youth, and she's probably referring to the later part of millennials as well, would be my guess. She doesn't ever use like generational titles that I recall, but she does refer to how using phones and computers to have quote unquote conversations, we're losing the ability to show empathy for each other. And then we can see the ramifications of that throughout the rest of the book. And she just tells some stories of how there's bullies and students who have no idea what the other students are feeling. And they're talking about a party that 90% of the group was at, but that one student wasn't. And that student runs away crying because they weren't there and couldn't be there. And the students around them had no idea that that was an issue to talk like that in front of her. So, that whole concept of showing empathy is one that she spells out very early and then talks about quite a bit throughout the rest of the book.
Yes, although with empathy specifically, I couldn't help but think back to our discussion on emotional intelligence.
Yep.
Because emotional intelligence is a combination of intrapersonal skills, so self-management skills, and interpersonal skills for living well with other people. And it's not just communication, which is where conversation would come, but that's a part of it. And I think the lack of empathy is more so an indication of a lack of emotional intelligence than it is a lack of conversation. Are those linked? Probably, but I don't think there's a one-to-one correlation here either. Like one of the things that employers are really clamoring for right now are these soft skills that typically don't get taught in school. So you cannot teach these skills. That doesn't mean they can't be taught, by the way, but the fact that they typically do not get taught, and then you notice when they're not there, well, duh.
Yeah, it's true. I kind of figured that would come up at some point whenever we have this conversation, mostly because like we've talked about like the book Grit, or when we went through emotional intelligence, there's a lot more to it than just one particular aspect. I don't want to say but she does seem to have the viewpoint that empathy, I might be putting words in her mouth. I feel like her intent was that empathy is a deriving point for a lot of other, in this case, emotional intelligence qualities. Do you think that's fair? I'm not certain that that's 100%.
Where I think empathy is required for conversation. But I think the argument that she's kind of making is that a lack of conversation has led to a lack of empathy. I don't think that part is as clear cut as she made it sound, because there's a lot of other emotional intelligence factors. I think it's more direct if you flip it the other way around.
I think that's fair. Regardless, she likes empathy a lot.
So do I.
I think that's
important.
It is important. She tends to make it the thing throughout the book, though. So keep that in mind as we go through here. But that's the first piece of the first part. So she's using that as the jumping off point here, in that the use of, in this case, texting would lead students and groups to the point where they're not being considerate of other people, and that leads to a lot of problems that they go through down the line.
Yep.
So
exactly. And I guess just to clarify, like what I'm saying is that she's kind of using it as evidence of, see, we've lost conversation and we've lost this empathy. And that's the part that I don't think there's a real clear connection to.
Sure.
I think it's very easy to say there's been a decrease in empathy, and as a result, we're seeing a loss in conversation. And because of that, use that as the springboard into the rest of the book. But the way she did it felt a little bit disingenuous to me.
Sure. So then what would if that's the case, then what was, in your mind, what's causing that drop in empathy? Because like in her mind, the lack of conversation and being face-to-face and having voice to voice back and forth with somebody else helps you build the empathy muscle in this case.
Yep.
But if you're saying it's the other way around, what's the trigger?
Well, I think it's the prioritization of the technical skills and the decreased emphasis on the soft skills or the emotional intelligence skills in general. That is the thing that has caused us to get to the point where we're seeing a decrease in this stuff. It's because we're not focusing on it and we're not developing those skills specifically. And you can say, well, it's the phone's fault because we text instead, but it's not just the phone. It's the television. It's a whole bunch of things that have contributed to a culture of convenience and not wanting to do the things that are difficult and maybe important, like conversation. So conversation is one aspect of this, but I feel like she kind of ties it directly to, because this one piece is gone, now we're seeing empathy, a decreased empathy, and a whole bunch of other things. But I think if tomorrow we were to decide that, you know what, soft skills are really the important skills, and part of that is conversation, part of that is communication in general, part of that is being able to work with other people in teams who are not like you. Like, there are different avenues that she would probably argue conversation plays out in all of those things, but I think they're bigger and they're broader than that. And we have to take that bigger view in order to recognize the true importance of these things. To just say conversation is missing isn't impactful enough for a lot of people, because you may not have these real deep conversations with people like she's talking about in the majority of this book, but you may have the need to work more effectively with some people who really rub you the wrong way, like Simon and Nadim from Triggers. And soft skills can help in that particular instance. You're not going into that thinking, you know what, Nadim and Simon, I really want you guys to have a deep heart-to-heart conversation. Like, no one's going to be like, yeah, let's do that. But that may happen organically if we had a broader approach to developing these skills. And this is where, like, the personal development space and the productivity space is really interesting to me, because a lot of this stuff comes down to, well, I can play the victim card and say all of these things have happened to me and it's not fair, or I can take control of my future and I can try to make myself better and develop the skills that are going to help me create a better future for myself and my family. And the thing that really makes the difference in a lot of those areas is not learning how to code or learning more facts, but it is learning these soft skills, these emotional intelligence skills. It's hard to measure the impact that they have, but you can look back after a period of time and you can say, oh yeah, those are definitely the things that helped me get where I am today.
So you're saying it's not the phones causing the emotional intelligence drop?
The phone makes it easier to avoid talking about emotional intelligence and soft skills.
I feel like you just said that the phone is at fault.
No, it makes it easier. So it's enabling, but it is not the causation.
Okay. I guess I'm not seeing the difference. So what I think I'm hearing is that the culture around convenience is leading us to a point where we're not as considerate of other people, and it's leading to the decline of emotional intelligence. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, probably. She makes a point later on. I don't remember exactly where it was, but
you get what I'm getting at? Like, I'm just trying to figure out where you're saying the center, like what the focal point is at the beginning of all of that. Because it sounds like it's the computers and screens and stuff that lead to that because of the convenience that they create.
Which I don't think she would argue computers and screens. That is a broader category than a smartphone.
Sure.
But the smartphone specifically, she mentions later on that this gives us a lot of power and we have to learn how to use it responsibly. And we have to put intentional constraints in place to control our behavior if we can't control it ourselves. I think back to Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky. And they have a phrase in there about how the smartphone is this phenomenal technology that allows us to connect with people across the world and do all these things that are good. But at the same time, it really ends up allowing us to do a whole bunch of things that we consider bad. And that's what we default to. Is that the phone's fault? No, I would argue. You could make the argument, I guess, that it's the app developers' fault because they're preying on our habitual behaviors. But even that, I think that really it's your fault if you don't control yourself enough to turn the thing off at dinner time, like she's talking about. And I've been there. I mean, we've got action items associated with this. So I'm kind of jumping all over the place here. But since you asked, I guess what I'm...
You can blame me. It's fine. We'll jump around.
I guess what I'm saying is that the smartphone is the easy thing to pick on because everybody has it and that's what everybody sees. But if it wasn't the smartphone, it would be something else. Maybe in the future, it's the Google Glass or the watch or whatever. You know, the technology is going to change and it's going to make it easier to not be intentional. And it's going to make it easier for companies to prey on your attention because it's valuable to them and your data. She talks about that in here too, which I thought was interesting. But at some point, you got to say, no one's making me do this. And I am going to use it this way. And I'm going to not allow people to do these things. You know, as we're recording this, it's interesting, like the privacy thing. People for several years have kind of just had this attitude, I think, of like, well, yeah, Google's probably tracking all my stuff, but I don't really care because I get a lot of benefit from it.
Right.
And Hey just got released and they shame people who track you in their emails. Are like, hey, this person's doing this. Naughty, you know, the big banner. And people are like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I had no idea people were doing all this sort of thing. Like, what happened in the last couple of years that people now are so concerned about their privacy? They're literally doing the same things they've been doing for years. But now it's like, well, they shouldn't be doing this, and there's got to be an alternate way to do that sort of thing. Could we have had that earlier if people had prioritized that? I kind of think so. And so for me personally, it's just, I'm not going to use my smartphone the way that I see everybody else doing it, but I'm going to be intentional and use it to use the good from it and shut out the bad as much as I can.
Okay, two things. She refers to the Fitbit and glass as part of the book.
Yep.
And how that's an extension of what she's talking about. Like, she does go into that and how those are yet more things, not just the phone. So she does reference things more than the phone as well. Okay, so that's...
And artificial intelligence and robots.
Yep, she goes into a lot of that stuff. So I can't say that, like, we're kind of pigeonholing her into the phone is causing this lack of conversation, which causes a lack of empathy, when she's not just focused on the phone. That's just her main piece that she talks about for most of it, but that's not the only thing she talks about. So I don't think it's fair to say she's saying there's a direct correlation between phone use and a lack of empathy. I don't think that's 100% fair, because she does reference a lot of other things that lead to similar issues. What was the second point? I got the first one written down, and I didn't get the second one written down. Oh, the data, the privacy thing. Like today, like, yes, they're still doing the same things as far as data collection. I think they've started collecting way more than they were 5 years ago, where we were whenever this book was written. But what they're doing with it has changed significantly from then till now. So I think, with all of the marketing and the smart information they're able to determine about you, like, I think that's partially why people are now having a lash back at all the data tracking, just because of what folks are doing with it. I mean, you think about, Mike, the tools that you use as a marketer, like an online marketer, like sending email newsletters. Like, it's nuts how much information those tools will give you about the people who have subscribed to your newsletter. Like, it's just bonkers. And you do nothing other than set up an account. And you're not even the person on the other end who's setting up the data collection.
Sure.
It's nuts. So anyway, that's
fair. Specifically to refer to the phone point, you are correct that she does get into some other stuff later. This specific section, though, she talks about how the first chapter, she introduces phubbing, which is maintaining eye contact while texting. And she talks about even a silent phone inhibits conversations that matter. And then in the next chapter, she talks about the smartphone genie, and it grants these wishes. Wish number 1 will always be heard. Wish number 2, we can put our attention wherever we want. Wish number 3, we will never be alone. And then the bonus one, we will never be bored. So she's not saying at this point that it's only the phone, but she's kind of implying that it is the phone that has gotten us here. And I guess what I'm saying is that kind of dates this book a little bit, kind of shows that it was written in 2015, because there's going to be other things that are going to replace the phone that are going to take these exact same things to the next level. It's going to be an even bigger problem than it is right now, but it's not going to be the smartphone genie. It's going to be something else. And that's totally not her fault. She can't look into the future and predict what's going to be next. But
well, you're looking into the future too, though.
I'm looking into the future by looking at the past.
Sure. Like, in what way? Like, what is...
Nothing's going to stay the same.
What has replaced the phone? Like, that would be my question then. Like, she's saying the phone is the central point and the biggest potential offender here. I would argue that's the same today. Like, it's still the biggest offender.
Correct.
This. So I don't think that has changed.
I agree. It's the biggest offender right now. But she mentions the Google Glass thing, for example. I kind of think that was a product that was ahead of its time and maybe a little bit not exactly it wasn't presented in a way that people were able to normalize it. Like, it just had this kind of creep factor to it.
Right.
But there'll be a version of that that's more approachable, seems a lot less threatening, and people are gonna flock to it. Whether it's that specifically or something else, there's going to be something that will replace the smartphone. And I say that just because I've got kids who are getting older, and I recognize that even the stuff that I write about, this stuff for a living, and there are things that their approach to technology is different than mine. So she talks about like the voice assistants in the later parts of this book and series specifically. And I don't ever use any sort of voice assistant. My kids do all the time. I would prefer to listen to podcasts. My kids watch YouTube videos. So even though I am in this world, I am missing pieces of it, and I'm seeing like their affinity for these other things. And it's just going to constantly be evolving. It's going to constantly get worse. Not to sound all old man yells at cloud, but so the smartphone, I feel like this is, I don't know what would have came before that. That would have been level 1. That's kind of like level 2. Level 3 is going to be something else. And that's really what we should be looking for,
Sure.
in my opinion.
Yeah. I guess my point is that she's saying the phone is the center offender. Like it's the center, like the biggest problem because of how much convenience it gives us. And I guess all I'm saying is, yes, you're saying it will evolve into something other than that. I don't think she would argue with that. I'm just saying that in today's world, it's the same. So I don't think she's wrong in saying the phone is the center point simply because it still is today.
Correct. I think it also depends on what you consider to be your world. Like there's a whole section in here on education. Again, jumping all over the place. But I remember when I was in college, I had a laptop, but I didn't take it to class. There was no Wi-Fi all over the campus, and I took notes by hand. And I've often thought back and be like, man, I wish I had an iPad. Like that would have made things way easier. In the middle of a class, because she uses the example of a class she taught specifically where the students came up and they apologized for texting in the middle of class. And I think depending on the form factor, maybe at that specific point, the phone's not the thing. Maybe it's the iPad because you can hide behind the screen. We've all seen people take out their laptops in meetings and then you're like, I wonder what they're doing. So if that's the place where you're recognizing the effects is that you're attending one of these classes and you feel bad because you're addicted to your technology, but maybe it's happening through messages on your iPad instead of the smartphone. I know people who are able to put their smartphone away and go somewhere for an extended period of time, but they can't turn notifications off on their watch. Like this is very personal. The doors that we leave open to people and companies to arrest our attention at any given moment. And I think it's worth thinking through what those are for you, but it's not always the smartphone.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I was thinking about the Apple Watch a lot during this book, just curious to see if it, because I couldn't remember when it came out. Has it been more than 5 years ago now?
I think so. And that's a great example because I know people who are like, see, I'm not addicted to this stuff. I have notifications turned off on my phone.
Yeah.
But they get them all the time on their watch and they're constantly looking at their watch.
Right.
So the net gain here is absolutely zero. You've just transferred them from one screen to another.
Yeah. Well, so the other piece of this very first part, the case for conversation, is the flight from conversation. And we've been all over this, so I don't think we'll spend a ton of time here, but she makes the point that people a lot of times will have the phone with them, and it allows them an exit into another world or to see what's going on someplace else. And as a result, it forces the conversation to stay light because then you can dip in and out of it without having to truly focus on the conversation. So as a result of a device, whether it's your watch, your phone, whatever it is, because it can connect you to some other place, you're more likely to step away from the conversation and the face-to-face you're in right now, which means you're not going to go into a deep conversation. Because if you're floating in and out of that conversation, you can't follow a deep conversation.
Yep.
As a result of that. So it forces you to keep a light conversation, which means having a deep conversation is very difficult for people and leads to other issues, as we'll get into in the business section.
Exactly. She also says in this section that pro-conversation is not anti-technology. And I think that's an important point. We look at all of the negative aspects of smartphones and technology a lot of times, But if we can just learn to curb our own behaviors, those aren't necessarily bad things. She mentions that the average American adult checks their phone every 6.5 minutes. You don't have to check your phone every 6.5 minutes just because everybody else does. And if you can get that under control, then you can actually do a lot of good with it.
For sure. Now, at the very beginning of the book, at the top of the table of contents, there's a quote. And this quote is referred to in the introduction of the book, and it is then used as the section titles for 4 out of the 6 pieces here. And the quote is by Henry David Thoreau from Walden. I feel like that book comes up a lot. I really need to read this one, Mike. I know you won't because it's different.
Oh, I'm picking a different book for next time. I'm not sure if you've looked at it yet.
I haven't looked. I need to refresh the thing. I'll refresh it here shortly. The quote is, I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society. And the next part in the book is referred to as 1 chair. And the intent is she then goes through these 3 different pieces here. 1 is for solitude, and then she also has another chapter for self-reflection. And the intent here is that you are turning inwards as opposed to constantly being connected. And I think this is where she comes up with the phrase, I share, therefore I am. And what she means by that is that you don't really get to know yourself and what you think and feel about things until you've shared pictures or comments online, on Facebook, on Twitter, on wherever. Like, you have to share what you think in order for you to figure out who you are. It's kind of your way of figuring out your identity. Whereas if you spend time in solitude, which is her first point here, you have the time to do the self-reflection and such, which those are technically separate, but they kind of morph together in my head. But when you do that, you have a chance to think through what you think about something and process your way of thinking about it and determine what it is your opinion is on things, as opposed to having to share it with the world and hope they like it and, you know, tweak everything you're saying to what everybody else wants you to say. Thus, the echo chamber, Mike.
Thus, the echo chamber. This part made me uncomfortable.
Did you like my note under solitude? So we can I go there? I want to go there. I'm going to go there. So at the very beginning, we were talking about the empathy diaries. And one of the points, this is a very small point. This is a very small piece of this chapter, but I latched onto it because of Bookworm. And I hope listeners will appreciate that I latched onto this. The point was that reading fiction books helps the reader improve empathic capacity. And she just briefly mentioned how reading fiction is a way to combat the lack of empathy created by constant phone use.
Why do you think that is?
I just needed to get that out there. It's because you're diving into the world and seeing the thoughts and the experiences of these characters and how they're interacting with each other.
Because you're seeing conversations that you don't see in real life?
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
I saw that and I was like, I wonder why. And then I'm like,
yeah,
wait, that's really sad.
Yep. Yeah. But it does go even for folks who are not fully, like, they're not super deep on phone use. Like, even my wife is big into this, and she is far from addicted to her phone. And this is something that she loves to do because she gets to see the worlds of other people. And it's interesting to me how often she will reference a fictional character's reaction to a certain circumstance and how she's using that to inform the way she interacts with people in real life. It's interesting to me, but fiction's, it's dessert, Mike. It's not necessary.
Well, you could make the argument, I think, which is kind of how we got where we are, that a specific conversation is not necessary too.
Sure.
But we've seen the net result, or again, not a direct correlation here, but we see what that lack of focus on conversation and other soft skills, emotional intelligence skills has brought us to.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm still not probably going to read fiction, but I did take some time to think about why she said what she said about it improving the empathic capacity. She didn't explicitly say it, but I've kind of shared what I think or why I think that is. And I think you could get the same benefit from prioritizing conversation, which is a big thing I got from reading this book. Not to jump all the way to the end, but that's the big takeaway here is create more time and space for conversation. Not fictional conversation where you're peering into the world of other people. I get where that's like a version of this which is beneficial, but I think more beneficial, at least for me, is the actual conversations themselves. And that's uncomfortable enough as a hermit, an introvert who would much prefer just to send the text message than to call people and have the conversation, which, having read this, I've challenged myself to do that more this week. I've made a couple of uncomfortable phone calls, which they weren't even uncomfortable. They were just hard for me to make the call. And then once I did, talking to people, it was, you can look back at it and you can say, well, what was I so afraid of? But still, the resistance and the friction is there for me.
Sure. One of the things that I don't think she called out, yes, she talks about how people were using phones to get away or to avoid an in-person, a live, a real-time conversation. They were using phones to get away from that because it was messy and you couldn't edit yourself. But yeah, at the same time, I have a tendency to text in a lot of cases simply because it's way faster and I don't have time for the phone call.
Sure.
I will send off the quick message, you just need to know this one thing, and then I'm going to go away. Otherwise, if I make the phone call, it's going to be 10 minutes. So.
Well, as the person who edits the podcast, I can tell you that I understand the ability to not respond in real time and kind of self-edit.
Uh-huh.
But when you are amplifying that message and sending it out to a lot more people, there's only so much editing can do.
Yes.
If you sound like an idiot, you're still going to sound like an idiot when I'm done with you. Sorry.
Yep.
And there have been times where I'm editing and I'm like, I wish there was an easier way to make what this whole point that I just made sound more intelligent. But at that point, it is what it is. And so I feel like forcing myself to put myself out there has been beneficial in helping me overcome a little bit of that. And that's the thing I mentioned, this part made me uncomfortable when you were talking about not having to have all of these thoughts in public, because I am having more and more thoughts in public. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm sharing the sketch notes from the sermon notes that I take. That is really scary to me. That feels very personal. I am very much intimidated by doing that, which probably means that it's a good thing that I'm doing it. But I also think that if I am able to pull this off, an internet where I don't have to be so worried about every single thing that I say, because I share the truth and I'm not constantly editing myself and people know what to expect from me, I obviously have to live up to my reputation and I have to have the integrity and the character to sustain this. But that seems very appealing to me. So I'm quickly approaching the point where I do not have an unpublished thought, it feels like. But as long as I am true to myself in the thoughts that I publish, then that I think is a good thing and hopefully encourages other people to do the same and maybe loses a little bit of this negative stigma attached to digital communication.
Yep. I feel like I cannot say that I'm in your ballpark of no unpublished thought. That's a thing that content creators tend to say, and I don't argue with it. Sparky says that quite a bit, I think. And it's kind of a cool concept, but every time I've heard it, it's come from folks who do not have strong ADD in any way. I have thousands and thousands and thousands of ideas and thoughts that I'm never going to get to publishing. It's just not going to happen.
Sure.
And It's I just have too much. It's the way it happens. I do try to get around that somehow with, like, that's one of the things I've been doing with the Twitch streams. Like, folks who have been following me know I've been streaming on Twitch lately, and it's kind of a cool thing to do that because you can explore so many different ideas over the span of a couple hours and have conversations with people. Just kind of hang out and do some of that. Now, granted, it's kind of odd in that, like, I'm talking into a camera, but you're talking back through a chat box. Like, it's a little different in that scheme, but it is fascinating to me how much ground you can cover in that time. So it's fun. I'm planning to continue doing that, but it is interesting how, like, when you have a conversation, like when you're trying to publish things in public, like, yeah, you can't edit it, especially when you're streaming it, because that thing is recorded as you're streaming it, and it's there. Like, yes, you could delete it, but you're going to delete the whole thing. You can't edit out what you're doing. Like, it is there. So you have to be 100% real. You have to be genuine. You have to be completely honest with people when they're joining you for that. Otherwise, like, if you say something that's not 100% true, like, there's a record of it.
Yep.
And people will bring that back.
But the smartphone isn't the thing that allows you to be inauthentic. I mean, I remember several years ago, I was in a jewelry store shopping for a gift for my wife, and the person was showing me a necklace, and they were telling me a story of how the guy who bought this bought 7 of them for all of his girlfriends, and then they found out about each other and they all dumped him, and so he brought them all back.
Wow.
Like, I can't even imagine trying to keep all that stuff straight. Like, no, thank you.
Yep.
But people do it.
Yep. That they do.
I'm going to share things, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that I am sharing true things.
Yes.
And not try to remember which versions of myself I have promoted in different places. That's just too much work.
Right. Which, this is a good place to jump into the 2 chairs part here. And I think we're going to lump this all together. But 2 chairs is when you're interacting with other people. So to go back to Thoreau's quote, I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship. So this is when you're in a relationship with one other person. So it's usually directly to one or a few other super close friends, a small friend group of sorts. And the 3 parts inside of this part: family, friendship, and romance. So your close family, your immediate family that you live with, your friends, your very close friendships that you have, and then your romantic partner. And those 3, I feel like, are some of the most, I don't want to say heated, but they're the ones that you're going to have the closest ties to and be emotionally close to, which means that having face-to-face conversations are kind of important and borderline mandatory in a lot of cases. And yet I was shocked, Mike, especially in the family section, of the families that would handle their fights in a chat box.
Yep.
Like, that just dumbfounded me.
My note under the fighting by text section is this really a thing?
Yeah. Like, this is apparently a thing. I have never heard of this. I don't know anyone who does this, at least that will talk about it. I was dumbfounded by this. Have you run across any family that does this?
No, and I can't imagine doing that myself. But as I thought about this, I'm like, why would they do this? I think that the reason would be that you want to prove your point. You want to prove that you are right. So it occurred to me as I was reading this section that while fighting by text allows more time and space to come up with an appropriate response, it ends up being better for proving your point, but it ends up being much worse for saying you're sorry. Which, if you're really thinking about how are we going to resolve this conflict, that's ultimately what has to happen. Many of the difficulties that I've had, not just in my marriage, but in different relationships, have been solved when I have quit worrying about what the other person did to me and just apologized, whether I thought it was my fault or not. Just saying I'm sorry is like flipping on a light switch and now everything is good. And you completely miss that if you're doing it this way. I was also thinking about the side effect of this being that like conversations tend not to get as heated. But in my mind, I immediately thought of, well, that just means that things aren't really getting resolved. We're planting some grass in our backyard. So we have grass seed that we've planted and we've gotten a lot of weeds that have sprung up. And it occurred to me that, yeah, maybe you don't have the heated discussions, but it's kind of like using a lawnmower to run over those weeds. And it may look okay for a little while, but you haven't done anything. It's still there. It's going to resurface. I would much rather pull the thing up by the root and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yep. But that's the easy way to do it, at least if you're familiar with having those conversations in person. But I have to admit that when I was reading through all three of these pieces, family, friendship, romance, like the groups of teens that were having conversations on text at the same time that they're in the room together, or looking for parties to go to or group like gatherings that they could go to and trying to figure out if that's a better one. Like I've seen that in person where teens are trying to, like, they'll wait till the very last minute to commit to something because they're wanting to make sure that they pick the best of anything. Like that's some of the convenience culture and the choice culture that we have. Like because we have so many choices, we always want to pick the best of things. Like I see that a lot whenever we're buying things online, which is kind of tangentially related. Like we'll do a lot of research to make sure we're getting the best option for something. And that's not always worth all of the research it takes to go into it. Like I could do a lot of research on finding a new windscreen for my microphone, but frankly, most windscreens for microphones will do the job just fine. So just find something that'll fit what I want and go for it. Like that's the sort of thing you could do. But when it comes to trying to find the best place to be and waiting till the last minute and then changing once you're at someplace, like it just seems so flaky.
Yep.
And maybe that's us having some experience outside of that, but that seems like it's normal for some groups. And it's honestly, it's sad. It's really sad, but that's what she's getting at here. This is what we need to stop doing.
Yeah. People are always looking for better options, but when you do that, you end up making it impossible for you to be content with what you actually have. Whether that is a relationship with a significant other, another party you're looking to attend, which he talks about in this chapter or this section. And I don't know, as she's describing it, it just does not appeal to me at all. Another thing that really jumped out to me in this section is all of the issues that people had with their phones at dinner time. And you may think, well, yeah, kids these days. But no, it was the parents who had the issues with the phones at the table. She shared a lot of stories about interviews that she did with teenagers and college students who were like, Mom, please put the phone away. Dad, I want to have a conversation with you. Which really got me thinking because this year, Toby is a teenager. And I want to create a culture in our home where he doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. I'm sure like there's still going to be outside influences. I get that. But it occurred to me as I read this that maybe a lot of this is brought in by us as parents. Maybe we're setting an example in our own homes of what not to do. So one of my action items from this section specifically is no phones at meals. And I've actually taken this a little bit further. I won't get too crazy into the details here, but we know that Toby's going to be a teenager at some point in the probably near future. He's going to have a phone. We want to set an example. So no phones in the bedrooms. Well, I use my phone for sleep tracking. So it's been easy for me to say like, well, I need my phone by my bed because I use Sleep Cycle and that's how I track my sleep. But I bought this charging station, so everything stays out in the kitchen now. Plug the phone in there at night. No phones in the bedrooms, and he doesn't even have a phone yet, but we're setting the expectation.
Sure.
And so I've had to rethink how I am tracking my sleep. And I've started to do it with my Apple Watch.
So you sleep with your Apple Watch then?
I do. I put it on theater mode so the light doesn't come on, and I still use Sleep Cycle because it actually tracks like the how deep you're sleeping and all the REM cycles and stuff like that. I like having that data. So I'm doing it that way, and it means I have to charge it during the day at some point. But it's interesting to me because for a long time I justified it and said, no, I got to have my phone in my bedroom because I'm using it for this good purpose. But I also realized that meant first thing I did when I woke up is I reached for the phone.
Yep.
So this has kind of forced me to break a bad habit and get a little bit creative in figuring out a different solution to this. Now, the Apple Watch specifically, the way I have it set up, I'm not checking text messages. I'm not checking Twitter mentions. There's nothing that's coming in to my watch that I want to see. It's really just a health device at this point, where I'm using it to close my rings, exercise every day, and also now for sleep tracking. And I'm really happy with this experiment so far, but that's and I had actually started before I started reading this book, but having read this section, it kind of gave me increased motivation to make this work.
Do you feel like that still sends the right message though? Like if you're like, say Toby had an Apple Watch, would it be okay if he slept with it? If he doesn't necessarily have it set up the same way you do?
Depends if you're asking me that question now or in 5 years.
Well, you were talking about setting up the habits now.
Yeah,
like
that's true. Well, as the Apple Watch currently exists, I think I would be okay with that because you're not doing like video calls. You're not surfing the web from an Apple Watch. But if you're able to do those sorts of things, then that kind of defeats the purpose of the rule with the phone. So again, this is what we're doing right now, subject to change.
Yep.
But I think the big thing is just eliminating the phones. Right now, that is the thing that is the attachment device for both my wife and myself. So we're keeping them out of the bedroom, and It's felt really great.
Good work. Yeah, I want to do this as well, but it would be very easy for me to just say I'm going to charge it downstairs. I don't use Sleep Cycle on it. I use a pen and paper tracker. Of course.
AnalogJoe.com.
It's just kind of weird to me how that came out. Yeah, I don't use Sleep Cycle at all anymore. I used to, but the whole tracking thing on it, I sleep better without tracking it, it seems like. But anyway, I am joining you with the whole no phones at the dinner table concept as a result of this. The whole parent stories piece of this was disheartening. The number of kids who wanted to have conversations with their parents but couldn't because mom and dad were on their phone. So I have been, since reading that part, I've been leaving my phone in the bedroom. As weird as this is, it goes to the bedroom whenever we go to dinner because then I can't even hear it ring. So yeah.
Nice.
That's where it goes. One other piece that came from, this came from the next section. So we can go into 3 chairs unless there's something else you want to say about 2.
Yeah, my other action item here, and actually before I get there, I just want to iterate, I guess, that the no phone at meals, the no phones in the bedroom, really this is tied to the same idea of creating the time and space to have the conversations where appropriate. So dinner time specifically, this is the one where if I am intentional in seeking the conversation, it happens, but usually what ends up happening is we try to get people to the table at the same time. Doesn't always work. So it's kind of like herding cats.
Sure.
So some people are eating, some people aren't. I tend to be one of those people that just kind of like wolfs down their food, and then the temptation is to leave or to check my phone, and I want to curb that behavior specifically. And that's kind of related to the second one too. I don't really do this a lot. My kids actually are instigators of this, because they'll have a question about something and they'll be like, oh, take out your phone and search for it, figure out the answer. So the second one here is no internet searches and conversations.
Sure.
I don't typically do this, like I said, especially with other adults, but my kids totally can get me to do this at any time. So I want to stop that and teach them that if you don't have an answer to something immediately, that's okay. You can just talk about it and you can change your opinions later.
Right. We've been teaching our girls to say, I don't know. Like it's okay to say you don't know. Like it seems like in a lot of our culture, it's not okay to say you don't know the answer to something.
Sure.
Like everybody wants to be perfect in the communication with another person, so they will look things up and have a perfect streak of always having the answer for things. But it's not who we are. Like we forget things. We don't know everything. It's okay to say I don't know. So we've been trying to teach our girls that, which means I have to say I don't know more, which I don't like to do. So anyway, 3 chairs. I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society, which is where we start talking about education and work, which is very fun. It's the education piece starts off talking about online classes, which perfect timing for us, considering the entire world is doing online classes right now.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, all right, online school. It's not working. So it's entertaining to see her opinion on that and how we've been deep in it now. Now, granted, it's July, so a lot of this is past, like a lot of school has let out. I say that, and yet we are transitioning our homeschool into a year-round homeschool. So that's another thing happening. But yeah, education, I think it's interesting to see how technology has been slowly working its way into education. And she does point out a number of places where that's a problem. And students are either drawn to or repulsed by the concept of doing classes in person. So, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting section. I feel like you have a lot of thoughts on this, Mike.
I could potentially have a lot of thoughts on this section. So one of the things I wrote down in the previous section, just a question in my MindNote file, is how do you maintain conversation and community in the time of social distancing?
Yep.
I don't think there's an easy answer to this, which is why I said at the beginning, like, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt, because even if you were 100% on board with everything that she's outlining in this book, you can't do it all right now. But I also think that maybe some of this is just due to the defaults that we accept with the technology itself. So, for example, there's a whole section in the education chapter on Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, I believe, was a college student who had notes on Plato's Republic in her phone, but she had skimmed the chapter and she didn't really remember anything. She went and had the conversation and didn't have her phone with her, so she didn't have access to her notes. As a result, her grade suffered. And that got me thinking back to a couple of different things. The first one being my whole journey with sketchnoting. And I feel like now, if I hadn't really heard about that when I was in school, and I don't think I would have tried to do it while I was in school, because I would have tried to just capture all the facts and then review everything before the test. I was a pretty good test taker, but after the fact, short-term memory, I couldn't remember anything. I realize now that sketchnotes force me to synthesize the information and not only restate it in my own words, but to create a mental picture of the thing, which means that I retain a lot more information from things, which is great if you're not intending to go back and review things all the time. But even if you are, I think that this has a lot of long-term benefits. So I'm kind of in a position where I just wanted to get more out of the sermon notes that I was taking. So sketchnoting was the low-risk thing to try, and very happy with how that has helped me out over the last several years. I also think that you have to think about how and why you take notes. And in an education setting, again, it's easy to just take the notes based on what the teacher said because you want to capture everything that might be on the test. And I don't think that's a great way to do it. Maybe there's no way to avoid that, but for where I am right now, I bring up Rome all the time, but I feel like that has forced me to think about things differently and in a very good way. It feels like the next generation of note-taking where it's not a filing cabinet where stuff just ends up in. And if I get inspired, I can go find something later because I know exactly where I put it. But it allows me to synthesize things and connect things after the fact. And it helps me not just to collect facts, but to actually learn. So if the goal of education, and I think maybe self-education is really the place where you have more control over this, not group education. But if your goal is to learn, there are things that you can do using technology to make that more effective. But again, that's not what most people are going to do in a school setting. It's not what most distance learning programs are going to look like. And I'm not sure that there's anything specific you can do in those situations other than to make the best of what you've got.
There's a lot there, Mike.
Yes, there is. Sorry.
I don't think I have a lot more to add to the education piece. I think the work side of it is the one that's of most interest to me because she refers to this concept of doing remote work. And that's such a big thing right now as well. And shows how it's important to do these face-to-face meetings. And she gives the example of how certain leaders are the best whenever they are the ones setting up the face-to-face and able to drive those and do those well. And yet she goes through the downsides of meetings and how people use it as time to catch up on their email, which is absolutely true, 100%. In the corporate world, that is 3/4 of the meetings that you're in is people on their computers doing things that are outside of that room, which is very similar to what the students were doing with texting. They're checking in on all the stuff that's elsewhere as opposed to focusing in on the conversation you're having right there in the room. I remember I had a supervisor at one point that would very frequently require phones and computers left outside the room when we were going to brainstorm, and the only thing that was allowed in the room were whiteboards and whiteboard markers. That was
awesome. Love it.
And that's how we did things. Now, that was the one and only supervisor I've had that would do that. And ever since then, it's been stuff on computers and phones ever since. But we always accomplished way more in those particular meetings. I think that's what she would argue for, but I don't think that's the norm at all, given the mass amount of email that is required and the expectation of instant replies that a lot of businesses and companies put on their employees. Even the requirement to have the little green dot showing up all the time and making sure it doesn't turn yellow, like that is a thing. And I don't think companies realize the downside that comes from that, and yet it's a requirement. But
so let me ask you a question here.
Yeah.
Because in the education section, she mentions there's two choices for teachers. They can change the students to fit the environment, or they can change the environment to fit the students. Let's take that approach to the workplace. Okay. Now, you are a manager who's hosting a meeting, and you want it to be an effective meeting.
Yes.
Do you require that people leave their devices outside of the office, or do you solve a different problem and maybe it's the email thing? If that's what people feel compelled to check, or maybe it's the company message thing. Do you think this is company culture or the device?
I think it's both. I think there's an overarching culture that leads to that, and then businesses assume that that's what they should be doing, so they don't bother to change it. So I think there's potential where you could, in order to break that, you have to break the culture, I think, which then will change the meeting structure. Because if you break the culture of meetings as well, meetings are not updates. They're times when you go and make decisions or solve difficult problems together, which is borderline impossible when you have people disconnected and floating in and out. Similar to what we were talking about earlier, like when you have your phone around, it forces the conversation to stay light because you can't go deep because your attention is too fragmented. This is very similar because if you're focusing on email or, thinking about the things you have to do whenever you get done, you can't go into a deep brainstorming session or a time to figure out what the best answer is given a situation or decide on whatever it is you're trying to decide on. You can't do that if you're only halfway there, like if you're only partially paying attention. Like, it just doesn't work. So I think you do have to break that.
Right. So I kind of set you up with that question.
That's fine.
Because that,
I never do that to you.
I think that is the heart of the argument I was making at the beginning of this episode, where the smartphone is the portal into the things, but it is not the things themselves that are causing the anxiety of, I've got to go check that. You still, whether you have a smartphone or not, feel compelled to check your email. You still, whether you have a smartphone or not, feel compelled to go check what's on Facebook and all of the other endless feeds. The smartphone is kind of the scapegoat because it's the thing that gives you the instant access to those things. But in a work setting, the more socially acceptable version of that is the laptop or the tablet or whatever. And so it kind of depends on the circumstances, like the external atmosphere, but there's a deeper problem here. And for someone in a workplace environment, it can be difficult because you just say, well, this is the culture where I work. The only way to solve this is for me to get a different job. I can't get a different job. Really? If you really wanted to, you could. if when pain is sufficient, change will come. But for most people, it just hasn't gotten to that level yet.
Right.
It's not important enough for them to find a job where there's a more calm company culture, which is completely fine. We're making these decisions all the time as to what is really important to us. But you could make the same choice about any of the other areas that she talks about in this book. Even with your family, I think that there is choice there. You're not just subject to the pull and the allure of the device. There are things that you can do to change the culture in your family. There are things you can do to change the culture in your friendship circles. And yeah, maybe those are hard choices to make, but if you care enough about stuff, you'll make those choices.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good point. But let's go into the next section because I think this will circle back into that. The path forward. And then she talks about the public square, which is primarily geared towards the information you post online is public. Like, whether you think it's private or not, it's public. And the tracking that these companies do is just bizarre whenever you start digging into it. And I think that there is a fair number, like a fairly large population today. I don't know if it was whenever she wrote this, but today I feel like that tracking and that data awareness is leading pretty large groups of people to, I don't want to say rebel, but to change culture and alter that. This might be why we were talking about how we don't know families that do chat to solve issues. Like, we don't, maybe that's because we've gotten past that. Back at the very beginning, I was saying, I don't know if we're completely, we haven't gone to the succession of what she's referring to in this book, but I think we've maybe taken that next step. We're not completely removed from it, but I think we maybe have taken that next piece and embraced it, because I think we've become aware of what these devices are doing, but I think we're right at the tip, like at the very beginning of that. I think we're just now starting to see that become more of a thing. Like, look at the whole mindfulness and digital minimalism concept. Like, even like with analogjoe.com, I have a survey that I ask people to fill out whenever they join the community, the team there. And one of the things that comes up over and over and over again that people are asking about with, wanting to explore analog productivity, like it has to do with calming the crazy and not wanting the digital products to change all the time, like wanting to find tools and stability and keep things from being chaotic. Like, that's a lot of what people are looking for because they're trying to find the separation from all of the digital, which is fascinating to me. Maybe that's just because I'm focused on that. That's my echo chamber, but it is interesting.
So the other thing in this section here about the data and the privacy, they talk about how technology causes us to give up privacy for convenience. And this is the thing that I feel like she really nailed this. This is exactly what has been happening for a long time. And all of a sudden, it seems like now stuff's coming to the forefront. And maybe it's just because in my own echo chamber, WWDC just happened, and Safari's got a whole bunch of stuff where they're blocking tracking, and Hey came out recently by the Basecamp people, and they've got the big notifications like, so-and-so is trying to track you with this. We stopped them though. And I feel like the response to that sort of stuff has been extremely positive, whereas even a couple of years ago, people were like, whatever, no big deal. Like now, for whatever reason, people are kind of pushing back on this a little bit, which I think is a good thing. She mentions on page 306 that these days, the most important data to those who watch us are the data trails we leave as we go about the business of our daily lives. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the true value of the data that they are willingly giving some of these companies. So whatever sort of tech defaults and standards can be raised to protect people's privacy, I think is a good thing. Sure.
I think so she goes into this last part. I'm just going to jump in here and then we can work towards wrapping up. The last part is called A Fourth Chair with a question mark. And the chapter title in here is The End of Forgetting. So think about the section we were just talking about, the data that's being collected. All of these devices capture data, store it, goes into a database, and then it becomes something that can be used to do analysis later on. All of that data is captured by these machines. But this fourth chair is an extension of the quote by Thoreau. And Thoreau's piece was, he was talking about these three chairs, but she says that she wants to think about the fourth chair, which is, in her mind, kind of a philosophical one, in that it's this chair of communicating with machines, like having a conversation with a machine. This is where Siri and the Google piece, and dare I say all the dingus names? Hello, Google, Alexa.
See how many of them you can trigger for people who are listening to this.
Alexa, play Baby Shark. So this is... Sorry, team.
Too far.
This whole conversation with the devices themselves, like actually having these conversations. And she goes into a lot of things where this is becoming a relational type piece that I think could be dangerous. I think she would agree with that. It's something you have to be careful with, but it is something that you need to be aware of, that we're starting to go down that path. At least we were 5 years ago. We're quite a ways down it. But I think you had a good point earlier, Mike, in that like your kids talk to, like they use these voice assistants, but we don't really. I rarely do. I even have, mindset to do the whole talk to Siri instead of, calling it out. I won't say it.
You mean type?
Type to Siri, sorry. But yeah, that's what I use it for. And then I set up like little shortcuts, almost like text expander to trigger shortcuts, like Siri shortcuts. That's what I use it for. But I never talk to it. That seems weird.
Yeah, I agree. This chapter was interesting. I didn't like it at the end of the book here, though. So I get why it's here. She's taking the chair analogy to a logical conclusion. But I feel like the Nick of Time chapter from the Path Forward section would have been a great place to end this. Because this is where, on page 318, she talks about, I was looking for this quote earlier, We don't have to give up our phones, but we have to use them more deliberately. So again, she's calling out the phones kind of specifically throughout the meat of this book.
Right.
But then she gives a whole bunch of like action items for this. Slow down, create sacred space for conversation, talk to people you don't agree with, think of unitasking as the next big thing, challenge the view of the world as apps, choose the right tool for the job, learn from moments of friction. That would have been an awesome ending to this book. But that's not how she ended it.
Right.
She ended by talking about robots and AI.
Yep. I feel like there are a lot of places we could go with this, but I feel like that's a good place to stop, Mike.
Sure.
So, should we do action items? I got a couple.
Let's do it.
Which we've talked about already to some degree, but no phones at the dinner table. So mine's going to the bedroom when we're eating. And then the second is, and she references, maybe I didn't talk about this point, but saying texted instead of talked. It's pretty common for folks to refer to talking to someone when actually, like in reality, they sent emails back and forth or they sent text messages back and forth. We'll oftentimes say, oh yeah, I talked to Steve and he said, well, I didn't actually talk to him. I had a text conversation with him.
Yeah.
So I feel like I want to be clear about how I actually did it, because I feel like it's a little bit deceptive with that, and that's not my intent. So I'm going to try to be quite a bit better about that and just be aware of it.
I like it.
That's what I got.
All right. My action items, no phone at meals and no internet searches and conversations. Mentioned both of those while we were recording. So don't need to say anything extra about those, I think. But this book gives you very clear, I feel like if you were to read this, there's going to be one or two things that you're like, oh yeah, I should make this change.
Right.
So I like the action items that came out of this book, and I feel like anybody who reads it is going to get something.
Yeah, for sure. As for style and rating, like the style of the book, it's long. I feel like there are a lot of pieces that are drawn out longer than they should be. It was pretty common for me to feel like I read 5 pages that were covering all the same thing. So that part I struggled with. I feel like it should not have been 350, 380 pages, whatever it was. I don't think it should be quite that long. To me, it feels like it should be a standard 200, 250. So that part I took exception with. Other than that, like I feel like it was pretty easy to read. Like as far as the actual style itself goes, I think it just got long. As for a rating, I feel like I have a lot of complaints. I question some pieces. I think you have a good point with the culture versus the phone. Like, I'm not sure the phone is all of it. I understand why she picked on it. But I think it can go beyond that. So, as far as where I want to put it, like, I don't think this is one that, like, this is not going to be the one if I'm trying to show someone that you need to think about your technology use. I don't think this is the book I would send people to. I think I would send somebody to something like Digital Minimalism for that. At the same time, she's making the point that face-to-face conversation has suffered. I don't think I would argue with that particular point. I don't know that we've run across a book that talks about that specific dynamic and how we have stepped away from face-to-face conversation and some of the potential benefits of holding real-time communication. Like, I don't think we've really done that. So I think there is some value in that particular piece. Overall, though, I don't think, like, this is far from a 5-star, but I think I would put it at 3.5. Like, I just don't see it up in that top tier level of books. So I think it has to go somewhere close to the middle, and I'll put it at 3.5. That's just what it feels like it should be.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed this book. It took me a really long time to get through it.
Yeah, it's a long one.
Partly because it is so long, but partly because I didn't want to skim anything or miss anything.
Right.
I'm not doing a good job of describing this because I don't skim books generally. Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I did skim sections of that. I hate to admit it. But when I'm really engaged with a book, I almost like slow down intentionally because I don't want it to end. And for the beginning part of this book, that's exactly what happened, to the point where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to have this done in 48 hours and there's 200 pages left.
Yep.
So I feel she did a really good job bringing me in. I really enjoyed all of the stories from all of the conversations that she had. It's kind of hard to describe the style of this book because it's not really like a scientific study. She does share some statistics. It's more so she did all of these interviews with all of these people, and then she's sharing like specific anecdotes from those conversations to support some points, which I feel like she did a really good job of. I think this is a really easy read other than the length. I feel it's a very important read, even though I railed on it at the beginning about how like conversation is really just one aspect of like the bigger picture when it comes to a lack of soft skills and emotional intelligence. It really challenged me to up my conversation game. As I mentioned, I made some phone calls this week where in the past I probably would have sent some text messages, been like, nope, I got to push myself to where I'm a little bit uncomfortable. And every single time I've done that, it's been great. So I want to continue to do that. Don't have an action item specifically associated with that, but do want to share that, like, just even thinking about the importance of conversation has already produced good fruit in my life. So there are little nitpicks I have with some of this stuff. It definitely doesn't need to be, like you said, 360 something pages. I did not like the last section with the fourth chair. Like I said, at the end of the path forward, I feel like that was a great spot to kind of wrap things up with, here's what you need to do with all of this information that you just gathered. And then going into the fourth chair, the end of forgetting feels a lot of like pie in the sky, hypothetical. I don't know. It felt unnecessary to me. So maybe stop there if you want, if you're going to pick this one up. But I think this is not a typical bookworm book, I should say. Like it felt, and she references the Shallows, which we had read earlier, and I did not like that book, but this one I really did enjoy. This one felt like a breath of fresh air. So I'm really glad you picked this one. I'm going to rate this at 4 stars, actually, 4.0.
Awesome.
So I'm going above Joe on his book.
That's interesting. I feel like it usually goes the other way for sure. Huh,
yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, we can put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
The next book is The Crossroads of Should and Must by Ellie Luna. I picked this before I really dug into what this is. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at this at all, but this is a different type of book. It is very visual, and even though it is something like 160 pages, this is going to be a very quick read. Okay. This is kind of the anti-reclaiming conversation. It's going to be a nice break after this lengthy tome.
So we have to get Twitch working for next time then. Is that what you're saying?
I suppose, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Looking forward to it. I have it on order. I don't have it quite yet. It's supposed to be here, I think, tomorrow, Monday, one of those two. So, yeah, that'll be interesting. Following that, did you know that Patrick Lencioni has a new book out?
I did not. What is it?
It's called The Motive: Why So Many Leaders Abdicate Their Most Important Responsibilities. And this is from February of this year. So it's only a few months old. And I want to go through it. So, The Motive by Patrick Lencioni. I feel like we like his books, but this was brand new. So we'll see.
Awesome.
It doesn't have a number in the title, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. He usually has the 3,
that is very
the
true.
5, the 4. Like, he always has something. But this one is just The Motive. So we'll see. Got any Gap books?
Not at the moment, but if I get to one, I will mention it next time. I don't like sharing Gap books that I aspire to read because usually I don't get to those. I'd rather share the ones that I have read as Gap books, or at least started, and I have not started any.
Yeah,
I barely got this one done. This is down to the wire.
I know. This is a long one for sure. So anyway, thank you to folks who attempted to watch us live and watched us debug unsuccessfully. We'll try again next time. So twitch.tv/bookwormfm I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes for that. Yes, we'll give that another shot. And big thanks to folks who are premium members on the club, bookworm.fm/membership. And in that premium membership, you get access to all of Mike's MindNode files, which I don't think have gone away in the world of his paper explorations.
They have not.
And at the same time, you get a premium Bookworm wallpaper, access to a premium area in the club. There's a few Gap Book episodes I did a while back, if you're interested in those. Those are shorter, like 15 minutes or so. But those are in the archives from probably well over a year ago at this point. But anyway, if you would like to support the show, help us keep the lights on, bookworm.fm/membership, and we would love to have you a part of that premium club.
Awesome. So if you are reading along with us, pick up The Crossroads of Should and Must by Ellie Luna, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.